Hi, let's talk about Chapter 5. Now, Chapter 5 is sending you a way to find a way to organize your code in such a way that it's easy to maintain by categorizing it in three major components. And we're going to show you a pattern called MVC for Model, View, and Control pattern. So you can kind of think, oh, model, view, control. View and control makes sense. Model is a little bit different. So let's take a look at what this organization, how we're going to structure our code from here on out. So we're going to show you how to use this pattern, this MVC pattern, to develop your web applications. You're going to do this by creating and using functions that interface with database, interface with users, use some built-in header functions and header and footer functions. And then when you're done, you'll understand what this model, view, and controller pattern is, how it can help improve application development, and then describe some different techniques and stuff. So this MVC pattern is based into model, which says, hey, anything that represents data. Now, in this case, we're looking at a database, similar to what we did last chapter. So all the routines that have access to database, whether it's opening it, accessing a category database, accessing the product database. Then you have this view. Which ones do listing information, whether it's error messages, whether it's adding products, adding categories, creating lists. So you got access to the data, what the user sees. So this is kind of like internal to the system, internal to give me all access to all the data. View is what goes between the program and the user. And then the controller says, hey, how do I make the two talk to each other? How do I take information from the customer? Which routine am I going to call and go through? So you get HTTP response. You get a request from the controller. It says, hey, what am I going to do? Open and close my database. Go out and list whatever information is and return that information back to the browser. So you get this basic structure to we need to look at how we're going to restructure our projects from here. So this MVC pattern is just a way of organizing your programs. It's not going to just make it easier to maintain. Model represents what data application, and the view is the HTML and PHP that represent user interface. So you've got control, data, and represented the user interface. So that's kind of where we're headed with this going through. Now, before we get too carried away, there's some basic function. How do I call a function? How do I code up a function I'm going to use? So before I create this MVC model, one, you got to make sure all your function names are unique. The name can't begin with a 1. They can contain only letters and numbers and underscores. You can pass parameters, arguments, within a function, and if you have more than one parameter or argument, just separate them by commas. And if your function has to provide information back to the person that called it, you can use the return statement. Now, when you're calling a function, you pretty much say what? I give it the function name followed by the parameter. So if there's no parameters, it'll be, car, left paren, right paren, semicolon, boom, done. If there are parameters, they have to be in the same sequence as defined by the function. So whichever function, however you lay out the sequence of activities that are going to take place, or how you're going to call this function, the sequence of parameters has to be the same. They don't need to be the same name, but they have to be in the same sequence. Because remember, what are they going to do? When we do this, we're going to put this information in an array, and it can be accessed one of two ways. So just keep that in mind. So here's some examples, a few slides of that. So here's the syntax. So you got the word function, the function name, parameters, either with or without a parameter list, and of course that's the statements to be executed. Whatever's going to be done. Now here's an example here that returns one parameter. So here I'm going to return what? I'm going to pass the category ID, and I'm going to return the product. So now this global here says, hey, I'm going to use a global. So somebody outside of this function has defined DB. So that way I'm going to be able to use this global variable $DB in my code, as you can see down here when we're creating our query. But this keyword here tells me this is an outside, somebody else has defined this, and I'm just going to use it. And then here's an example of that return that says here, I'm returning the products. So you see function, the name, see the underscore stuff, passing an argument, using a global variable, structures in whatever I want this function to do. In this case, I'm creating a query and gathering the data, and then I am returning that information. Here's one that passes 4 parameters. And you can see same basic structure, but here each of the parameters, arguments are separated by a comma. Again, a global variable, but just keep in mind that however when I use this function, I've got to put them in these same exact sequence when I use this add product function. And as you can tell, I'm returning what? I'm returning nothing. Because what's this one? I'm adding a product, so I'm putting stuff into a database. I'm not returning anything. Now, if it's a failure, you may get something. But here's one with one argument and returning an array. But as you can tell, I'm getting the return. What am I getting? Get products, passing category ID, and here I'm getting the address of the product's information. So just keep in mind, parameter list is one or more parameters. Parameter is just basically data that's being passed to a function. Return, just at the end of execution, returns a specific value, and it returns to the statement right after the call. Now, keep in mind when you're declaring variables with a function, if variables are assigned outside of your function, you got to use the global keyword. If any variable you decide inside your function are only usable by that function. So just keep that in mind. So how do I, now when I'm thinking about controlling my program, how can I redirect my requests, my calls? Now in chapter 2 we use the include function to call, but you can use forwarding only allows maybe one trip to the server, but guess what? The browser, when you execute it, shows the original URL of the page. Sometimes you like that. That's fine. It's faster because all the work is done on the server. So I forwarded it using the include function, went over all the work's being done on the server, and whatever information comes back. But just know that when somebody's looking at your web page, they see the URL of the original page. Now, there's a function called header function that specifies the location, otherwise the name of the header followed by colon and a path name, the path of the program you want to execute. Now, this path can be absolute, which means from root all the way up to where the file is located, or it can be a relative path name within relationship to where things are today. Now, if I'm sending a pattern in this redirect, you got a question mark followed by the pound sign, equal signs followed by the parameter, shows you how to send a parameter. So let's look at some examples. So here's this built-in function, the header function. So I'm giving it a path name. These here tell me they are relative path name, relative to my current location. Now, if you've taken a Linux class, you know that the dot indicates current working directory. If it's a ... here, like you got here, it's one parent. It's my parent directory. If I do / some folder like this one, / admin, says current working directory and the admin directory underneath the current working directory. The error.php is assuming current working directory, so I don't have to be specific as far as that. And in here is the absolute path. So it says I'm giving you the full path name as to where this program is located. So just give you an idea of how that header function functions. So it's quote, location, and the path of what you want to execute. And then here's just an example of how it's used. So here, let's say we got an action. I'm going to delete the product. So now I'm going to filter the input, pass it on, give me a product ID. Now I'm going to check if this product ID is null or false or not equal to false. Then I go ahead and delete the product. But what am I going to do? I'm going to do it in my current working directory. So I'm using this header location, go through here. Now here's where I'm actually going to return. It includes a parameter, so I'm redirecting it. But now you see this is where I got my location. My dot says my current working directory, and I'm returning, the category ID with this variable. So just keep that in mind. So let's go through our example with the product list page. This is our product manager application for chapter 5. We're going to look at now the structure, kind of talk a little bit how to call routines. Now let's look at how we're going to start structuring this. So our model is what? Those are models where I've got all the interface to the data located. So usually it's a good idea to create a folder and locate all the PHP folders on there that do access that database. Anything that's accessing external data sources. Here you got my database. They're alphabetical, but we know the database should be called first because that'll open the database. And then you got your category database and your product database. Since our application, our Guitar Shop, has those two databases in there, so each one of those has different access. Here you see our view, and there's a few other things that we'll go into a little bit later. But so under this model folder, you're looking at all the files that deal with accessing data. So here you got, our add products page. So when you click the add product, it'll give you a list. So here what I'm doing, I'm calling, I got my function. So here's the definition of function. I'm returning, you've got global variables, and I'm returning the categories, returning category names. But all of these, as you can tell, I'm getting the categories, I'm getting a category name, I'm getting the products, I'm getting a product, either products by category or getting just an individual product list. So anything that deals with accessing the data goes ahead and gets there, gets put into this. And now we've structured it so that each one of these, based on which product it is, and I think that's a good structure so that when I'm thinking about the database, I'm saying, oh, I've got a product database, and then I've got a category database. Knowing you've got two different databases, so anything that uses that particular table, I would have a separate folder on. So just keep that in mind. Because if you look back at our list here, we've got access to the database and something for our two different So anything that's going to access my product database, all the functions will go in that PHP program. Anything accessing my category database will go in the category PHP. Now the controller file. Now the controller file, those are the PHP files that receive requests from the users. And it gets appropriate data from the model and then returns the appropriate views to the users. Now usually under the controller file, it's the index PHP file is underneath that directory. In this case, you look at the controller, the product manager, and that's really what we're talking about. This is our major developer. I mean, this is the name of the product. I mean, it's my product manager, and I've got an index PHP file that says what? I'm going to call my different database routines, make sure that they're in play, and then I'm going to gather information from each one of these. So this way I'm getting checking if it's null, making sure I've got, and I'm going to say, give me a list of products. So if it's a list of products, what am I going to do? I'm going to gather the category ID, and then I'm going to process everything I need to do. So I've got a valid category ID. Now I'm going to get the name, get the categories, and get the products by that category. So these are the parameters I set, but then I'm going to call the product list PHP. Now, why am I doing the product list? Because I'm trying to get what? I'm getting the list of products first. If my action is delete a product, you're going to set all your variables accordingly, and eventually, if everything is successful, you'll call your delete product category. Again, here's your show, here's your add products. Again, you're seeing the different actions, what you're going to do, and then based on what data you get, you're going to create your input, check your error message if you need to print a message. Otherwise, I'm calling my function and passing my data back. Now, like I said, the view now is the user interface of the website. It includes the header and footer files, which sometimes are called helper files, because you want everything to be consistent across your web page as far as what the footer looks like and what the header looks like. It contains tags for starting the web pages for the application, including the CSS file, to make sure it has the same look and feel. And then the footer has the footer tag, copyright, company name, things of that nature. So if you get an idea of what this looks like. Now, usually when you're looking at the header PHP, you've got it using the href to call the CSS file. Now, we'll get more into that a whole lot later, but just know that you've got the header file. It's going to call this main CSS, and pretty much that's about all it's going to do. A little header. The footer style says, yep, copyright, and I'm going to put the date in this. If I use the date function, capital Y gives me the current year. So this is what you look for. So basically, my view is relatively simple to make sure that it's consistent across everything. You're going, well, that's not the only views I've got. And that's true. It isn't the only view you have, but those are the ones that are view across the whole site. Now, if you've got stuff that is only viewing for a category or for a product, those can be under those product directories. So in this case, here's your product manager product list. It's a view, but we're going to store it under the product manager list so it has the right thing. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to call the header. And I think if you go down here a little bit further, you're going to find here's my footer. So you're going to do that every single time so that that way I'm only changing the header and footer in one place. So if the date changed, the company name changes, something, you're only modifying things once, because we don't want to get having to remember, oh, I got to change things in 4 different locations, because human nature is we're going to forget something. So in this case, you're going to use header PHP. Now you're going to say, I got a header. Now I'm going to list the categories. So here's our for each that we used before, getting all the categories. And here, as you can see, you got the for each and the end for each, as we saw last week. So that's showing the list of that. Now, Here's the continue of, so you had the aside, which gives me what? The list of categories on the side for this case, and then shows you the section area, shows you the table itself of the information for that first category, or at least the category specified if that was the case. I'll let you go through that stuff. Just another view in case I'm still adding a product. So this one was product list. Here's my product ad. I'm calling my header. Here's my add product. Give me my action. I'm going to check my category ID, do some error checking on it, gather all of my information, and pass that information on, and then call my header. So the organization is not that complicated, and I think if you look at the textbook and go through the last section, actually goes to this product database, product manager application pretty well, you'll be able to see where things kind of fall into play. If you have any questions, give me a call. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.